that during creativity still happens, creativity still emerges. And that has been a very cool thing. So this challenge has not changed who we are, it's just revealed who we are.
My name is William Stinchcomb, and I've been with the Columbus City Schools for 23 years.
My name is Mr. Dorsey Birdsong. I'm a safety and security specialist.
My name is Anita Roman, and I am a Columbus City Schools bus driver.
My name is Samuel Gonzalez. I'm a food service manager currently at Briggs High School.
I know that if I'm not there every day and on time, that student may not have a ride to school. And that weighs on me heavily. And I take pride in knowing that my students can set their clock on me. I'm always, it takes a lot for me not to come to work. It's important to come to work every day, be on time, because we may be the only way that student gets to school.
Seeing the kids years later and having them come up to me and say how thankful and grateful they were and happy that, I kept them safe in the district and, that I can't retire or leave the district until, their kids graduate.
This was one of the best decisions I've made in my life. I didn't expect to live for this, but I love being part of the Columbus City School as a family. I just think because the building represents our districts, for me to see how clean the building is, I can take pride in my effort, and to put the cleaning and the organizing of the building, it just makes me feel a level of pride.
Peaceful mind can accomplish a lot of things. And when a student is hungry, their mind is oftentimes on what the next meal is going to be. In an indirect way, we affect the students in the kitchen. They can accomplish what they have to in the classroom. And for them to accomplish that, oftentimes that's going to better their situation for themselves, their family, and their community. So in a sense, helping the student in an indirect manner with the food is something that I really enjoy.
Columbus, Ohio has so much to offer our youth. The growth you can obtain from being a part of this district is huge. There is such diversity and learning experience happening throughout our K-12 buildings.
I love to see the excitement in the kids' faces when they know they can start school the very next day. So it's exciting for the families. So I think it's very impactful because it gives them that first start to, learning and growing.
I've been working with kids all my life. Coming here, meeting the students, the relationships that I've built over the years is just phenomenal. I'm seeing students, still see students to this day that thank me. Just, thanks for everything you've done. Thanks for helping provide a safe learning environment. Thank you for the talks, and they're really appreciative.
The district provides training throughout the school year and a lot of information that's constantly updated, and it's always available.
And welcome to today's Finance and Appropriations Committee meeting. Today is Wednesday, September 6, 2023. Today we do have a really rich discussion ahead of us, a full agenda. Of course, we'll convene with our meeting, we'll approve minutes, then we'll go on to the fiscal year 2024 budget request. In addition to that, we'll do an ESSER update. And post that, we'll do a discussion, a rich discussion, if you will, on general fund and permanent improvement overview. We'll have that informative discussion about our permanent improvement and operating levy initiative. And then, of course, we'll adjourn. Can we get started with a roll call?
Are we officially being recorded yet? I just want to make sure.
We are up and at it. Yep.
Okay. President Adair?
Present.
Board Member Brown is absent. Chair Cole?
Here.
Jack Green?
Here.
Ms. Johnson?
Here.
Jeff Jordan? Absent. And Jordan Miller? We have a quorum.
All right, wonderful, thank you. Is there a motion to approve our minutes?
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and second. All in favor? Aye. All right. Moving forward, we will do the fiscal 2024 budget request. I'll pass that on to you, Madam Treasurer.
Okay, and I'm going to pass it right on down to Terry Addison, who is our Executive Director of Budget, who can explain the details.
and like a wide receiver, I'll catch it.
There you
That's
go.
That's a good idea.
Good afternoon. Good
Good
afternoon.
afternoon, Chair Cole, committee members. Before us today, we do have a budget request for our Career Tech Education Program. This request is to include it in the 2024 appropriations. And one may ask, well, why now and not at end of year when we set up all the other appropriations? Because in June, we did not have the numbers. We never have them before July 1. So now that we have all the numbers and the amount to spend, this is a pro forma. It's not a voting, but it's just a more of informational that, hey, we have all the numbers now, and we would actually present this to the full board on September 19th to include now the FY24 Career Tech Education appropriation.
Okay, I thank you for that. And this is a $2.3 million appropriation.
Yes.
It seems a fair portion of it is weighted between some very functional things around insurance, around classroom curriculum things. About $1.15 million is around classroom supports and curriculum needs. Another $75,000 towards some other things around equipment. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Absolutely. And actually, I'll keep with our passing theme. We actually have the director online here. Her name is Ms. Megan Noble. So Ms. Noble, did you hear the question? Are you able to respond?
Yes, board member Cole, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. This is our normal budget requests. A little bit more probably this year with programming and equipment for curriculum for staff and students.
And this does not include salary and benefits in this appropriation as well, correct?
No, sir.
Awesome. All right. I'd just like to be transparent and make sure we're clear, and if there were any questions that we could answer in advance. Are there any questions from the committee at this point? Awesome. Thank you so much, Mrs. Noble.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. So moving on.
Yes. Oh, if we're ready to move on to the next item on the agenda, the ESSER update, I believe, is the next item. We have Ms. Catherine Moser is going to present the actual update here. And as she comes to the podium, I'd just like to give a quick shout out and a thank you, because I think some of our federal representatives may be watching and chiming in. Just to share with the committee, we've received a tremendous amount of funding over the past 3 years to help get us through the pandemic, and I would definitely like to thank our representative at the federal level. Without stealing too much of Ms. Moser's thunder here, this year alone, we're going to have $290 million of ESSER 3 monies, which she'll explain in her presentation. So that alone, just to put it in perspective, our normal grant year, we have about $250 million total of all combined grants. So this 1 year in ESSER alone is more than what we normally get for our grants throughout any given year. So with that, she looks like she's ready now. So without any further ado, I'll let Ms. Moser take it away.
Good afternoon, Madam Deputy.
Great. Thank you very, very much. Somebody running slides for us. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Terry, as Terry mentioned, these one-time funds are nearing $500 million. And as you can see on that timeline, we are in the final year. We are in September of 2023, and ESSER 3 will close out in September of 2024. I'll make one additional comment about that at the end, but certainly that ESSER 3 bucket is the largest one, and we'll tell you a bit about what we have done with ESSER 1 and 2 and what the plans are for the remaining funds. So we have closed out ESSER 1, did that on time, and again, thanks to the Treasurer's Office for all of our cross-office collaboration. If you'll remember back to the beginning of the pandemic, the majority of funds were directed towards health and safety. And so you see that there in the highest expenditures that are called out to the side, but also the entire pie graph gives you a sense that in ESSER 1, we were really focused on health and safety, lots of sanitizer, and you remember the plexiglass and mask days. We moved into ESSER 2, which allowed us to return to school safely, and that was the initial focus of those funds. But we were also able to take advantage of an opportunity using federal funds that does not typically come about, and that is that we were able to use federal funds to address a number of our HVAC and ongoing facility issues, and to maintain our operations. You'll see a large call out for professional development. We started our professional development for teachers on the science of reading. Columbus City Schools jumped into that before the state regulated and actually used Columbus as a site to visit. Our teachers are already well into the science of reading professional development. It was a large investment. You can also see the investment around student technology in other academic initiatives to support instruction. So for the remainder of this year, we are really going to talk about the last two remaining funds. We still have dollars left over in ARP, which it can be used specifically for homeless children and youth. The federal government designated a specific fund for homeless children. And as you can see, there's a bit remaining in the first award, and then $450,000 remaining in the second award. The majority of those funds are directed towards youth advocates to support students experiencing homelessness. And then we get into ESSER 3, or ARP ESSER, and you will see that the amount remaining is approximately $113,594. This was run about 2 weeks ago, so that's where we were at the time. Your executive summary gives you the exact date that the numbers were run. And in just a minute, I'll give you additional detail about what is planned in that $113 million. The workforce incentive, you can see a small amount is left there, and our school-based health clinic, just give a call out there to our partners at Nationwide Children's Hospital and Primary One, who worked with us to open 2 new health clinics to support our students. So certainly Treasurer Vanover's presentation is going to go into more detail, but these are the significant strategies that will remain in progress for the remainder of this school year. So they vary from a couple $100,000 to, again, our curriculum coaching, which will provide professional development to teachers. That's nearly a $5 million investment. We continue to provide hotspots for some students, and we have a number of strategies around professional development, both to support the science of reading, as I mentioned, in addition to specialized professional development for general education and special education teachers related to inclusion and services for students with IEPs. I will also just call out here that our Family Ambassador strategy is fully funded on ESSER, and get into that a little bit more in a couple of minutes, as well as a strategy that we did not utilize prior to the pandemic, but that what I mentioned last time, and that is that we are funding some research assistants to help us develop a return on investment, to be sure that we are able to accurately report and on the return on investment for some of our highest leverage ESSER strategies. So we are seeing a benefit there. The Student Support Center serves students who may have a variety of vulnerabilities, and we fund that strategy specifically on ESSER, as well as training and development for our classified staff, which is also something that happened at a very, very small level prior to the pandemic, but that we have accelerated over the last several years. You also see a call out to Chromebooks and other technology. We continue to invest in devices for students as well as classroom technology. So you saw that September 30, 2024 deadline. That's the one that we've been talking about for 2.5 years now. I will mention that there is a opportunity for the district to continue capital improvement work through December 30 of 2024. I call that out here because in order to take advantage of the December 30 deadline for capital improvement projects only, so again, all other work ends September 30, but for capital improvements, there is an opportunity for the district to work together with the state and the federal government to extend our capital improvements opportunity through December 30 of 2024. We do plan to take advantage of that opportunity and work together with partners at the Department of Education and the federal government to allow us to extend our expenditures through December 30 of 2024. I will hopefully come back to you next quarter with assurance that we've actually been granted that, that extension. If not, then our funds will end on September 30, 2024. I'm going to turn this now to Jenny Vanover, who is going to bring you more detail about ESSER and our permanent improvements.
We have one quick question. Sure. I did want to open the floor up before we did that to any questions from the committee. Jennifer.
Thank you. Can you just remind us, as we decided what strategies and investments we were going to make with ESSER, why we chose kind of this path? Because different school districts did different things. We all had like the same kind of outline of what we could spend the money on, but within that, we had some flexibility to choose things. And I know as a board and a district, you know, we made a decision to test and try new strategies to see if they would work and figure out if we needed to then reinvest in those. So could you maybe highlight some of the strategies that we were testing and maybe ones that we know we saw or are seeing, you know, improvement, better student outcomes, better engagement, just high level. But I think that's important because every school district, especially this third pot of money, kind of did it a little different.
Yes, thank you. So we did make a decision fairly early on that we were going to take the opportunity to use funds to do some of the capital improvements work that had not been addressed in the district. Specifically, we still had a number of schools that did not have proper HVAC and ventilation. Schools without air conditioning, schools where the heating systems were not predictable and dependable. And so we did decide that we were going to take this opportunity and do work in that capital improvement space to address HVAC, but also other items that helped keep buildings warm, safe, and dry, such as roofing. We were able to do some classroom refresh in terms of technology to bring our students access to devices such as CleverTouch and other interactive software and resources in the classroom. We invested in things like flexible seating, resources to address SEL needs. We prioritized through our strategic plan priorities a whole child focus. And when we asked our principals, what do you need? What do your students need? They told us two things. We need a full-time school counselor in every building, and we need instructional coaching. We need support for our teachers in instruction. And so we made an investment in school counseling. And prior to the pandemic, many elementary schools shared a counselor. They might have had a counselor 1 or 2 days a week, but very few elementary schools had a full-time school counselor. And we even had some middle schools that were sharing. So as a result of needs of our students, we prioritized a full-time school counselor in every building using the funds available in ESSER. We also added school social workers in a number of buildings. So again, supporting that whole child focus. In terms of instruction, flipping to the remote environment and going to students accessing their instruction on Chromebooks, we made the decision that we were going to invest in professional development for teachers. And certainly we are seeing results already in that investment that relates to the science of reading and additional strategies that teachers are using in the classroom to meet the needs of our earliest learners. So we really use the board goals and guardrails and our strategic plan to align our priorities. Again, yes, we took advantage of that capital improvement opportunity, but we will well exceed the federal call out that ESSER 3, they said at the beginning, districts will need to spend at least 20% of ESSER 3 on instructional recovery. We will well exceed that investment. We also invested in additional security measures for our schools, not just the sanitizer and plexiglass, as you remember it in the early days, but we have utilized our Evolve detection systems using ESSER. A couple of other things that I would call out, high-dose tutoring. I cannot overstate the need of students, even to today, to recover learning gaps that occurred during the pandemic, whether students were engaging in online instruction or even once we returned to school. And so that high-dose tutoring where our teachers are working with students after school and during the summer on Saturdays to address those learning gaps. We also often heard that teachers were lacking basic instructional resources. And I know as board members, you're out in schools, teachers talk to you about that. And so we have been able to address more teacher requests for those basic instructional materials. Again, the training and development was a brand new strategy. During the pandemic, we certainly heard from our classified staff that they very much wanted to participate in training to not only help students engage in remote learning and then the return to in-person learning, but also a technology focus for our classified staff as well. So we have a large number of classified staff who participate in training and development around a variety of topics. Certainly our restorative practices professional development, we've been talking about that quite a bit in the last couple of days, but we've been able to accelerate that work using ESSER. I'll stop right there. I could go on and on.
We see. Are there any additional questions before I have one? So this might be, I see this as a perfect platform and entree new into the next agenda item. And perhaps you may cover this in your presentation. What is the financial value of extending the capital improvement measure through December 30th? How much additional are we looking at possibly drawing down?
So that's still a ways away.
Gotcha.
And so part of the reason that I pause for a moment on that is really the context that we have here in the city of Columbus right now. We are literally competing with lots of other people and industries for capital projects right now. We do not believe that we will be able to complete all planned projects by the end of next summer. And we feel that the opportunity to extend that work into the fall will allow us to meet the needs of the majority of those buildings. Alex Trevino and I will certainly come back with periodic updates for you as we draw down the remaining dollars. But we are concerned because we are experiencing workforce shortages in the capital improvements space in terms of what our contractors are able to provide. And we feel that the opportunity to continue to work through the fall will allow us to best meet those needs.
Understand, but there's no idea about what the additional dollar proceed could actually be in appropriation. Do we have an idea of an anticipated appropriation amount? Is it an additional 50 million, 15 million?
Oh, well.
Just, as I say, just to clarify, we're not saying that we would ask for, that there would be any additional appropriation. It's just that we would not have a full spend down by September 30th.
Gotcha.
It would allow us additional time to get those dollars spent. So
Okay,
there would be
thank
no
you.
additional funding, just timing.
Right, I was gonna say, this is like, even though it came in 3 buckets, this is a one-time hit from the federal government. This isn't something we can renew, right? This isn't something that we continue to get. And as you outlined, we chose strategies that fit within the guidelines, but also ones that we felt would really produce student outcomes.
Yes.
And so this is what, you're talking to us about right now, and talking about how these investments have helped our students.
And as I said from the very beginning, I think at this table, someone asked me about whether the district actually had this level of need. And I said at that time that part of what we were going to demonstrate was what it costs to educate the children of the city of Columbus. And it costs an additional $500 million. Those are one-time funds. And with that, I will turn it to Treasurer Vanover. But yes, President Adair, they are one-time funds. They have certainly allowed us to do work that was needed in the district that meets the needs of our students and families. And those dollars are coming to an end.
Thank you for that, Madam Treasurer.
So, are we ready to move on? Okay, so moving right into the continued message of one-time funding and where it leads us. We're going to now get into some factual data about the general fund and the permanent improvement funds and what those offer for the district. Okay, so with regards to the general fund, so this represents the budget. This is a graphic that we have provided as an educational tool for our community as well as staff that kind of represents the buckets that are available for the various funding sources that we have. General operating funds provide for the day-to-day operations. So you're talking your academic plan, your staffing, supplies, materials, all the things that are up there captured on that slide. These expenses are funded from a combination of things, primarily tax revenue, as well as state funding in the form of both the foundation payments that we receive from ODE, as well as the state share of local property tax, which is the new name for homestead and rollback. So in FY23, we received approximately 70.2% of our revenue came in for the general operating from local property taxes. State of Ohio provided another 24.3%, balance 5.5% is other sources, so just general other things. From the, for FY23, personnel, salary and benefits took up 84.5% of our expenses. Non-personnel obviously then took up the remaining 15.5%, the largest chunk of that being purchase services, which was almost 8%. So this kind of just helps provide a quick snapshot of what the bucket is, shares what funding sources provide the resources for this, and what expenses can be used from those resources. Again, providing some factual background, as I'm sure probably many of us remember, these are the key assumptions to recap from the last board-approved 5-year forecast, which was approved back in May. On the revenue side, in May, the budget bill had not been finalized. We had a $15 million transportation penalty built into each and every year of the 5-year forecast. The upside being, the budget bill has since passed. There were some improvements made. They moved from well, at the time, we did not know whether they were going to continue the phase-in of the funding formula. Luckily, they did. So that provides 50% in 24, and 66.67% in 25. In addition, it updated the cost sets, the cost inputs utilized to calculate the funding formula from the 2018 cost sets to the 2022 cost sets. So those were the things that we gained when the budget bill was passed. But in May, we did not know this. So the May forecast represented those numbers that we knew at the time. On the expenditure side, the academic side had been tasked with making a reduction on the non-personnel side to try to better align our balances at the end of the forecast. They made a reduction of around $16 million. That is held flat throughout the remainder of the forecast and the May forecast through 27. Base increases for salaries are represented consistent with what our contractual obligations are. So we have 4% in 23, 24, and 25. And Treasurer Bajorek at the time made an increase from the 1% that had previously been modeled in the forecast to take it up to probably a more realistic 2.5% base increase. In the May forecast, no ESSER positions that had been paid both previously or going into this year were included in the forecast. And this included a commitment to a $20 million capital transfer in each of the outlying years. This generated a cash balance deficit in 27 of $67.2 million. So again, it's just an overall recap of the factual data that we have for the forecast that's been approved in May. And this is simply a line chart to demonstrate that same data. This is where things get a little more interesting. This is what Catherine mentioned earlier in terms of the additional detail that we would provide. So this is providing the factual data as to what in fiscal year 24 ESSER will be providing. So we've broken it into 4 buckets, so to speak, which represents each column. And then within each bucket, we're providing both a staffing number as well as services that are provided. So everything in the staffing is paid through payroll, so it's personnel, salary and benefits, and anything listed in services is, in fact, a purchase service, a supply, and equipment. It's something that's considered non-personnel. So what this represents then is the resources that are being provided, as she stated, out of a one-time funding source that ends in September. So the impact of this on the general fund is all of these resources, all of these staff, all of these services, at this point have to now be evaluated and determine at the conclusion of this year and this funding source, does it get moved to the general fund? Does it get moved to another funding source? Or does it go away entirely? And that's the exercise that needs to be had and be brought to the board. But this helps capture and encapsulate the magnitude of what it is that has to be evaluated to determine the impact on the general fund once this funding source is gone. So one thing I will point out, this is based on what was included on payroll. So understand some of these numbers are going to fluctuate a little bit. There's timing issues with types of pay and just timing of when people started positions and those types of things. So these numbers are fairly accurate, but they may adjust slightly from pay to pay, month to month, those types of things. And our team is working with Catherine's team to make sure that we're staying right on those numbers to make sure so that if there's any kind of an adjustment and a need to reallocate funds somewhere else, we have that and we're ready to move quickly. So this is a lot of data to look at. I don't necessarily want to read it all to you, but I want to give you a chance to kind of look at that, take it in, and ask any questions you might have as it relates to this.
Are there any questions at this point about investment priorities and human capital and how we're aligning that to our academic needs, our operational needs? Are there any questions at this point?
Yeah, can I just restate it back to make sure I understand?
Absolutely.
So what this chart is showing is talking about the staffing as well as the programs and services that are funded that Catherine Mosier just explained to us.
Correct.
And so this is from that one-time ESSER. And so you're saying that based on what our forecast was, none of this is part of the forecast. So
Correct.
What we have to figure out is if we want to keep these things, if they're working, if we know we are getting the investment to improve our student outcomes, then we have to figure out how to fund it.
Correct.
And so positions, and the data here is telling us the number of positions within each of the strategic areas that we're interested in. So for example, social emotional learning, safety and security, the family support services, and academic readiness. And then it lists the services that could also, we would also have to figure out how to continue and fund, such as our Family Ambassador Program, such as the online academy and the high dosage tutoring that Catherine was just speaking about. And so none of this is on the forecast currently, is what you are telling us.
Correct. None of this was included in the May forecast. Absolutely.
Any additional questions?
Okay, so this is the nice picture that represents Catherine's point that in about a year it's gone. The sand is quickly trickling out of the hourglass, and it's going to be all on the bottom here very soon. So we are obviously making that concerted effort to make sure that all those funds get spent and we get the benefit that we can for our students. But the task ahead is to determine what of those strategies that were implemented and used to support our students, which ones we keep, which ones do we funnel somewhere else, and which ones do we not have the ability or the resources to support. So that addresses the general fund side of things. The next step that we have is the permanent improvement piece.
Can I ask a question before you get to permanent improvement?
Absolutely.
So just going back to the buckets that we had, so, a lot of the things that Catherine talked about in a lot of the ESSER, that does go into our academic planning and our staffing, but like utilities and maintenance, because that's general fund and that's, you were telling us that,
Right, is that the
we-
slide you mean?
yes.
Okay.
And so what it was, 73% is funded by our local property?
Correct. 73% of our operating revenue comes from local property taxes.
And so when we are
Or
talking,
70%, yeah.
when we're talking about things that are in that utilities and maintenance,
That's,
generally talk about
that's
things-
predominantly, that's like the cost of electric, the cost of natural gas, keeping the water on, and then you're talking basic day-to-day maintenance, not long-term permanent improvement maintenance. So that's the differential between what's provided through the general operating typically and what is allowed. Permanent improvement, which I'll get into in a minute, it needs to be something that has a useful life of 5 years or longer, whereas this is more the day-to-day stuff. So, a ballast breaks, we got to replace it. That's not PI money, that's general operating. Does that help?
Yes, that does help. And so when we get our tax money and we're looking at our operating budget, that is not permanent either, right? That's why we have a cycle of going back and asking our voters, so they approve an allotment. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, that's the fund mechanism that is House Bill 920 from the standpoint that we go to the voters, we ask for an initiative, they approve a millage rate. That millage rate is then used to determine the amount that's going to be collected on that levy, should it be passed. Upon passage, then we are capped, and we're not allowed to grow at the same rate that the property grows at. So as property values go up, as they, I'm sure, well, we know, are going up this year doing the reappraisal, we are not going to capture any additional revenue because of that. So yes, it puts us in a situation where instead of being able to capture some, perhaps even not all, but we don't have the ability to capture any growth other than the inside millage, which is not voted millage. So that's the difference. But we don't have the ability to capture any growth on the voted millage based on property valuation growth. So as a result of that, property values grow, needs of ours grow, collection stays flat. So that's why we, and schools in general, get into this cycle of every 3 to 4 to 5 years, depending on your situation, have to go back to the voters to essentially recapture what you've lost in House Bill 920, not allowing you to grow with your properties. That help? Okay. Okay. Moving into permanent improvements. Same picture, pulling out a different column here. This is permanent improvements. This is funded, for our purposes, this has been funded by typically a variety of sources. Predominantly, we do have property tax. We passed in 2016, the half-mil PI levy was passed, generates around $4.4 million a year. In addition to that, at the same time, we passed a $125 million bond issue. So we had two large revenue pushes into the PI fund for bond proceeds that were recognized. And then we've also, under board authorization, made several general fund transfers to address these capital needs through the PI fund. Again, PI can be used for updating those buildings. Again, it's got to be a useful life of 5 years or more. So we're not talking replacing ceiling tiles. We're talking fixing an HVAC system. So it's much more long-term permanent, oddly enough, termed permanent improvement. This also includes things like buses, equipment, computers. The one thing I want to highlight, perfect example, the one-to-one discussion that Ms. Mosher mentioned earlier in terms of the Chromebooks for the students, those do not have a useful life of 5 years or more. So that's not something that can be funneled here. That's typically a 3-year window. So that, unfortunately, is not a resource that we can utilize PI funds for. It has to have a useful life of 5 years or longer. So this fun little graph shows, on the left-hand side is the last 7 years. The gray bars represent those one-time influxes. So the basic trend in tonight's presentation is that we have had a lot of one-time funding sources, and they're all going away. So we have to address what that need is. So in this particular case for the PI, again, like I mentioned in 2016, we were fortunate enough to pass a $125 million bond issue as well as a half-mil PI and an operating levy. The bar you see in 2017 is the first bond issue that was for $75 million. The other half of that, the $50 million balance, was done in 2020, so that is the gray bar represented in 2020. In 2019, that is the $30 million general fund transfer that the board authorized to provide renovations to predominantly World Language Middle School, but other buildings as well received services there. The large bar in 2021 represents the $80 million bus transfer, or the transfer to recover or to establish a bus replacement cycle to cover a 10-year window of time for our buses. And then the combined total of 22 and 23, which is $40 million, was the first board authorization to transfer funds from the general fund to establish a capital improvement fund. And this was all done prior to the allocation that was received in ESSER and those funds being allocated to provide capital needs. So the gray bar in 2024 represents essentially our ESSER funding, which, based on the most recent revision that's in the CCIP at this point, is around $91 million. So again, we spend it, we recoup it, it's gone. The line that you see throughout this graph represents our cash balance. So obviously it goes up as we make those one-time influxes of revenue, and then as we spend them down, it works its way down, and since there is no continual revenue source to keep replenishing that, it will eventually go away, which you can quickly see in 2026. It's kind of difficult to see, but the little teeny tiny gray dash that you see in all of the years out on the right-hand side, that is the $500,000 PI levy. So that is the only continuous funding source that we have available to address our capital permanent improvement needs for our buildings. So this essentially encapsulates and shows that for the last 7 years, all of our capital needs have been met by one-time funding sources that are running out, if they have not already. In 8 years, we will have generated $366 million in one-time funding to address our capital needs. And once those monies are gone, we're down to 4.4 every year going forward. So that is that. This represents, in the event that a $4.4 million PI funding source was provided, where we are. This is what it provides. So the information, one point I didn't make on the right-hand side, the red bars represent the needs that Alex Trevino and Maurice's team has provided us. We basically asked them to lay out, if funding wasn't an issue, based on our current footprint for our district, what are our needs? And they broke it into buckets. Primary being infrastructure, keeping the lights on, keeping the doors open, keeping students in school. Then you have learning environments, and you also have athletics and athletic fields and site work. And they were prioritized because obviously first thing you have to address is keeping the lights on and the kids in this classroom. The other two, unfortunately, when you run out of funding, are the first things that go away. So they prioritize this, but the red bars on both charts captures what they feel is necessary based on industry standards and knowing our buildings the way they do. This is what we need to be able to be proactive, to provide preventative maintenance, to enhance the learning environments for our students, and to just address that and be on a more proactive instead of a reactionary mode. So those are the needs that they've identified and that we've modeled here in this graph. And this shows that with the 4.47 mils of PI funding, we would be sustained long past 2020 or 2032, I believe is the last year. So this shows, again, that we have a need. This provides a revenue source that would in fact sustain it. So that is what I have at this point. Do you have any other questions?
Are there any questions, committee?
Yeah, so, Treasurer, when we are looking at the difference between those two charts that you kind of ended with, we've chosen or it's been recommended by our financial team that having a permanent improvement that is continuously funded is a better and more responsible financial plan. Could you speak to that just in general about why that would be versus how we were doing it or are currently doing it in these one-time investments?
Yeah, the downside, I think the clear downside to the one-time funding is that when the money goes away, there's nothing to recoup, there's nothing to replenish it. So you address a one-time need, and then the funding is gone, and if another need arises, you don't have the resources to address it. So unfortunately, aside from these one-time funding sources that we've provided, I believe the typical plan that we've had, and Mr. Oldham can speak a little bit better to this probably, is if it breaks, we fix it. If it's not broken, we hope it stays, and we, cross our fingers and we move on. But there's not a lot of
that run to fail.
I think that is the phrase that I have heard, yes, run to fail. That's not a good option because, for one, you will get to a point where you won't have a choice. Something will break beyond repair, and you'll either have to shut it down, move kids out. It's very problematic. You don't want to get yourself in a scenario where you cannot maintain your buildings in a proper status. But our funding source, $4.4 million, is not a sufficient regular funding source to address 112 school buildings, plus however many admin buildings we have to handle. So it's certainly not a good model as it relates to buildings. From a financial standpoint, you're potentially throwing money into a building that down the road is going to break, and you're going to have just thrown a bunch of money, and you're chasing dollars with pennies. It's just not a good financial model to follow. So.
Any additional questions? Yes, sir, Mr. Green.
So the funding source, the 4.4, where is that again coming from?
That was back in 2016. We passed a $500,000 PI levy, continuous PI levy, at the same time that we passed the bond issue and the operating.
And what's the recommendation for the remaining, to keep funding it? Is there a recommendation?
The ballot initiative request was for $4.7 million.
Yep, got it.
So essentially, what this is all designed to do is help us, as you said it very perfectly, proactively address a financial situation that allows us the capital to address our issues in a way that's ongoing and that's sustainable, A. And then B, at the same time, be able to do it in an affordable, responsible way. Can you talk a little bit more about that in terms of how that ties to this millage concept as well?
Can you ask that another way?
Go ahead.
Kind of more about the financial responsibility and why this is the plan and why, as an expert, you are saying that this is more fiscally responsible for our district and how we go forward in budgeting and expenditure.
Right. Yeah, like I say, when this was modeled and the millage rate was established, again, we worked with Alex and Maurice's team to lay out what the need was, and then we modeled and laid out a long-term plan trying to establish that long-term planning function where you're not in a situation where you have to constantly pull from the general fund or some other source to fund that. So when we captured all of that, we'd have a nice big calculation, present value and all that fun stuff that determined what the need was to be collected on an annual basis and backed into what the millage rate based on the information that we had for the property values would generate. The nice thing about this, like I say, the benefit to this is you have the ability to not only keep our buildings at a proper level, you also have the ability to improve upon them in some cases and provide a better learning environment for the students. Right now, we're trying to keep the kids cool when it's hot, and we're trying to keep them warm when it's cold, and make sure there's no water coming in from the ceiling and those types of things, and that's not providing the best learning environment for our kids. But without this continual revenue source to be able to help fund that and be proactive with it, we get ourselves into that run-to-fail type of a mode where we're constantly having to pull from other places. And when we pull from the general fund, that's pulling from the academic programming. That's pulling from other places. We need to have a dedicated resource to just address our buildings. If we only had 2 or 3 buildings, the need might not be as drastic. We have 112 school buildings. I don't even know what our total is for all the admin buildings. We're talking a large number of buildings that need to be addressed, and our only continuous funding source is $4.4 million. This provides the necessary resources to do that long term.
Yes, Ms.
I have a question on operating though, so if we have other PI questions before, okay. So looking at the ESSER programming that we all know, right, the funds are coming to an end. Have we talked yet about, or I'm assuming we will, if not, what programs we're keeping and how that will impact the general fund?
Those discussions are being had internally.
Okay.
To evaluate what programs. We actually had a very lengthy meeting about that very topic today, because the intent is to bring forward a recommendation to the board of what stays, what goes in the event of any options that we have.
Right.
Again, nothing has been formalized. We're in that evaluation stage, and Dr. Chapman and or Catherine can speak a little bit better in terms of that side of things. We've been in there working with them as they go through there to help identify costs, where they're currently funded, what stays, what goes, are we switching this out for this, here, those types of things, trying to help figure that out so that we can model it and figure out what to bring forward to the board. So,
Madam Superintendent.
Yes. So in thinking about that question, though, certainly we are considering the investments that we've made as a part of ESSER and thinking about what programs, services, and positions are mission critical to ensure that we continue to support our students, align to those board goals and guardrails. But we're also very clear that we will not be able to bring any of those programs or positions over unless we increase revenue, right? So we've already made it clear. We look at our 5-year forecast. We've been asked to reduce our expenses already. We had to reduce our non-personnel non-personnel budget. We've had to maintain a flat staffing levels, right? That's baked in. So that means that no matter what happens, we cannot increase our staffing. We cannot increase our expenditures. So while we're prioritizing what our students need, what our schools need to be successful, we have to be mindful that we will only be able to honor and meet those needs if we are able to increase our revenue on the general fund.
yes, as we all know, the only way to better the bottom line, you either add revenue or you cut expenses.
Right. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
No additional?
And just on that point, that we've done both.
Correct.
We're doing both, as you mentioned, and it was part of the slides. There was an ask that you cut or work to cut through your budgeting process a certain amount, and in fact, we couldn't hit that amount without impacting student outcomes.
Yes.
And so it was only 16% that we hit. And it was an exercise in the budgeting and how we got to the forecast. But it isn't, this is about, ensuring that our students have what they need in order to, reach their outcomes. And so it's a balance, and we are doing it on all sides to be responsible, as you say, Treasurer Vanover, in how we are looking at our revenue and being responsible, as you say, Superintendent, to ensure our students are achieving and meeting our goals for them.
Absolutely.
Are there any additional questions or thoughts, ideas to bring forward? Awesome. So before we adjourn, again, I want to thank the team for the discussion that we've been able to bring forth to bring some more general understanding, a more layman understanding of the decisions that we've made thus far and why we chose to go this direction and what the intended outcome of it is. In addition, that there's been some return on investment in the process, particularly through ESSER and that support, that there's actually been some return on investment with our second grade reading. There's been return on investment with our community partners and community engagement, and also our family ambassadors that have been very supportive of families and engaging the community, and more importantly, partnerships that have also helped us leverage additional community support in health and wellness for students. So I appreciate also hearing the return on investment. I see this personally as, a very clear kind of ground setting to getting some at least low-hanging fruit ideas about what we do need to keep based on what we've seen in value add to the district, what has really made sense in the classroom for us and outside of the classroom for us. So I thank you for that. If there aren't any additional questions or thoughts, is there a motion to adjourn?
Moved. Second.
All right, moved and seconded. If there are no nays, we are officially adjourned. I thank you.